Today we have Brian Meir from Brazil Wire joining us again to talk about the election controversy and the recent ban on Twitter in Brazil. So, how are you doing, Brian?
Pretty good. Enjoying all the extra free time, not having Twitter.
So, Twitter got
Better
banned.
concentration, less, attention deficit problems.
Sounds like a blessing in disguise. So Twitter, it's not on Russia's side, but on the other side, Twitter, like I need to use a VPN to access Twitter in Russia. But yeah, but I kind of do enjoy the not having to always check up on what's going on Twitter.
Well, here they're using it as a deterrence, but they've announced a fine for people who use VPNs to access Twitter. It'll be interesting how much that affects it, but definitely it's weeded out. Of the 22 million Twitter users in Brazil, it's weeded out at least 21.5 million of them. It's only like the hardcore people who would use a VPN to go on and look at their Twitter. Most Brazilians don't care that much about Twitter. It's only the ninth most popular social media platform here.
What's the most popular social media platform in Brazil?
Right now, I think it's TikTok.
Oh, that's good. Um, so let's back up and talk about what happened. So last time you were here, there was so there were some right-wing accounts that based on certain court cases were required by Twitter to be censored or blocked in Brazil. And most of it was because of some sort of incitement or some other violation of Brazilian law, right?
These were accounts that had been deplatformed, before Musk took over Twitter, and he reinstated them. But basically, yes, these were criminal suspects. They were suspects in criminal investigations into internet-based crimes. Okay, not censorship. Brazil doesn't have censorship. These were, according to Brazilian law, they were acting completely within the rights of the law, right? I mean, because like freedom of speech in Brazil is an essential freedom, essential human right, but it can't be used to deny other human rights. So you can't use freedom of speech, for example, to incite school massacres, to advocate for pedophilia, or to try and interfere with a democratic election process. Brazil has much stricter election laws, especially during the campaign period for about 6 weeks before the elections. Like it's against the law in Brazil to take out a negative campaign ad. If you use a negative campaign ad, that is taken off the air immediately and you're fined. And so people were trying to skirt that law by running negative campaign ads, negative campaign propaganda on social media in violation of Brazil's electoral laws. So they were deplatformed, just as Lula had dozens of campaign commercials removed from the air because they were deemed to be negative by the electoral court. Bolsonaro also had every election season hundreds of candidates have their across the political spectrum have different commercials of those removed from the air for violating the tight election laws.
And so what was happening is that despite these ads violating the election laws, they were using Twitter to skirt that violation.
They were what? I'm sorry.
They were using Twitter to skirt that violation.
Yeah, they were using Twitter and a variety of social media platforms, not just Twitter. These are people who were deplatformed on all the social media apps. They were using these social media apps to violate election laws and also to make violent threats against members of the judiciary and their families, and also doxing people from the judiciary. And so that led the judiciary, which doesn't have, the US has its own judiciary police force, the US Marshals, and the Supreme Court has its own police force above and beyond the US Marshals, which are the Supreme Court police, which have their own intelligence unit. And the US Marshals arrest about 90 people a year and kill about 20 people a year, 90,000 people a year, sorry, and kill about 20 people a year. The Brazil doesn't have judiciary police. The judiciary policing is outsourced to local and federal police forces. So it was a failure of the system to adequately deal with a catastrophic rise in death threats, rape threats, threats against family members, threats to people publicly calling on the military to shut down the Supreme Court, that caused the Supreme Court president at the time, Dias Toffoli, to delegate overseeing an investigation to one of the 11 Supreme Court justices named Alexandre de Moraes, right? This was in March of 2019. And through this process, many people got deplatformed as well, because Brazil has laws about that. Like in the United States, you can't make detailed plans online on how to kill the president. You couldn't advocate people killing Supreme Court justices online, or even beating them up or something like that. That would be against the law in the United States too. So, and in many countries around the world. So that was the issue that started this kind of like false narrative. And then, okay, what happened by coincidence is that the same judge who was in charge of this investigation into assault and threats and doxing of members of the judiciary, because of the regular rotation, he became the Superior Electoral Court president during the about 2 months before the 2022 presidential elections. When they found, and he subsequently stepped down. He served his 2-year term, and he stepped down willingly. There's nothing authoritarian about him doing that at the time. So basically, when the far right found out that he was going to be in charge of the electoral court as well, then they started this massive campaign, and he was used as a target all during the build-up to the 2022 presidential elections, as they preemptively, like copying Donald Trump and everything, started this "Stop the Steal" narrative, and so that's how we've arrived at this situation today, where people like Glenn Greenwald are calling him the dictator of Brazil or something,
Yeah, and just to clarify, is it Alexander or Alexander?
Alexandre de Moraes.
De Moraes. Yeah, Alexandre de Moraes. He is mostly a center-right judge, right?
He's a conservative, yeah. He was appointed by Michel Temer, who supported Bolsonaro in the 2022 elections. Temer was the coup president who took over after Dilma Rousseff, US-backed, coup president, and he campaigned for Jair Bolsonaro in 2022. Alexandre de Moraes was a Michel Temer appointee.
Okay, so why? So today I looked at Elon Musk. He targeted Alexandre de Moraes, and many right-wing commentators are targeting him, even though he seems to be center-right. Why are they targeting him?
They're targeting him because he's enforcing the law. He's just enforcing the rule of law. And also, I think part of it is because he looks kind of like Dr. Evil, or kind of like a Bond villain. He's bald, and he's menacing looking. And so it's really useful to have him in names and things like that. But he's just one of 11 court justices. He just happened to be the one in charge of a couple investigations into Bolsonaro and their supporters. So if they hadn't been attacking him so much, well, I don't know, but I think what happened is that Brazil's Supreme Court was directly involved in the coup against Dilma Rousseff, and they were involved in a negative way in Lula's imprisonment. But what happened is they basically unleashed the Kraken. So they didn't expect Bolsonaro to take power. And so when Bolsonaro and his followers targeted them personally and their families, they became much more interested in upholding the rule of law. They realized that they'd made a mistake. It's not all the same justices. I mean, there's a lot of justices left since the coup in 2016. Moraes wasn't even there. He was appointed in 2017. But the court as a whole, and I think it's really important to not act like a typical American individualist capitalist and individualize analysis of these institutions, like the court system here. I mean, Alexandre de Moraes is one person. They've singled him out as a representative of the court. But the point is, he's part of a process. He's part of one of three branches of government that has its checks and balances against each other. So when you say, oh, Moraes, for example, Moraes outlawed X. Look at this horrible dictator, this horrible boogeyman. His decree pulling X down was ratified, was upheld by a unanimous vote by the first working group of the Supreme Court 2 days later. So it's no longer a Moraes move, it's the court itself. It's not a lot of the stuff that they're blaming on him are just actual like court decisions that have all been ratified in plenary session by the Supreme Court. He's not even the Chief Justice. Huh?
Can you explain how the interplenary session works?
Interplenary session?
Yeah.
I don't know what interplenary means. I'm sorry, you're a lawyer.
Oh, okay, in Brazil, from what I gather, so there's a court decision, and then with the decision, it has to be ratified by a secondary committee within the court.
Every ruling, basically the court is broken up into two working groups.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, group 1 and group 2. One has 5 members, one has 6 members, right? They each have 5 members, but the president can cast a tie-breaking vote. So there's 11 members in the court. Okay, so when a court judge unilaterally makes a ruling or a decision or gives an order, that has to be ratified and can be rejected by one of the two working groups. If the working group rejects the decision, the justice in question can then call the entire plenary session, all 11, 10 plus him or her, to vote on it. If someone works a constitutional challenge to that ruling up through the court system, then the entire court would rule on it. That's basically how it works. It's a kind of way of saving time and not having to call a full session, every time a judge makes a ruling. But in this case, it's important to point out that the first working group, then the members of the groups are like randomly chosen and stuff like that. The first working group voted to uphold Moraes' decision 5-0. There was no dissent. Then internal analysis and polls or whatever think that if it went to a full plenary session, it would be like 9-2 in favor of the ban.
And so what is the ban permanent, or is it conditional upon X/Twitter following certain regulations?
Yeah, it's very clear. All Twitter X has to do to lift the ban is abide by local laws, abide by Brazil's telecommunications laws, meaning they have to appoint a lawyer to represent them in Brazil. That's the only criteria for X reopening. They don't even have to pay all their fines to reopen. All they have to do is appoint a lawyer, like any other communications company operating in Brazil would have to do.
Yeah, well, to me, it seems like it's standard among every corporation that works in a country to have like a legal representative for which you can serve notices and stuff like that. So why has not X done that?
Musk is trying to make this big political issue out of it because it's a growing like rallying cry of the international far right that, like the Trump election, like 2020, after the election against Trump was stolen, that the Democrats helped Lula steal the election in Brazil, that Maduro stole the election in Venezuela. Javier Milei was building this preemptive narrative that if he lost, it would have meant the election would have been stolen in Argentina as well. There were hundreds of tweets and, messages, people being bombarded on WhatsApp and everything on election day that if the Malay lost, the election was stolen. It's just a new narrative from the international far right. So in strengthening this narrative against Bolsonaro, it strengthens Trump's narrative. Trump is building this a new Stop the Steal narrative as well. It's like these people, they all meet at CPAC, they all meet at Fora Madrid, and they exchange tactics with each other. So like it's just the exact same thing that Maria Corina Machado was saying about Venezuelan elections. And it's the same thing that the Trump people are saying about US elections.
So that makes sense. And it seems like they're making it into a free speech issue as opposed to corporate governance issue.
It's not yet. I mean, it's more than just a corporate governance issue. This is as Fabio Sá e Silva, who I interviewed for a Telesur News story about the X-ban in Brazil, said, there's nothing new about this story. It's just another case of an American corporation acting like it doesn't have to obey local laws in a country in Latin America. This has been going on since Chiquita Banana, Standard Oil. This has been going on since the 1880s, 1890s with U.S. corporations. I mean, who couped Chile? Who was behind the coup in Chile in 73? It was ITT Corporation. So it's just another fucking big ass U.S. corporation connected to the deep state, the war industry. Elon Musk, he's embedded in both the Democratic and Republican parties, trying to act like they're above the law. Huh?
He also has DoD contracts.
Yeah, exactly. Like he has contracts with the Brazilian military that Bolsonaro set up when Bolsonaro was president. And one thing that's really important to point out, because of these edgelord, conspiracy. I don't want to use the word conspiracy theory because it was invented by the CIA, but these edgelord fake narratives. It's important to point out that the U.S. State Department issued a warning to Brazil's Supreme Court on the day that it decided to ban X, that they were worried about free speech. They were cautiously monitoring Brazil at the moment because free speech is an important pillar of any democracy. Mm-hmm. And then 2 days later, after Musk refused to ban X on Starlink, his Starlink operations in Brazil, they seized all of Starlink's assets. And so Musk went crying to the U.S. State Department, asking advice from the U.S. ambassador in the United States, as reported on CNN Brazil, for help on his legal defense to try and recuperate his lost assets from Starlinks. So the Democrats are helping Musk. The Democrats aren't backing up Lula right now. And it wasn't even Lula's decision. I mean, the Democrats aren't backing up the Supreme Court right now. They're backing up Musk. This idea that he's like this kind of person who stands up to the deep state, it's his own propaganda that he finances saying that.
So can you explain what Starlink is for people who are not familiar and how they're connected and what kind of contracts the Starlink had with Brazil?
Starlink is a system of low orbit satellites technology. It's one of the biggest technological advances to come out of the United States in a long time. And it puts the US in an advantage over even China. China is playing catch up on this right now. But basically, what are the advantage of low altitude satellites that Starlink has? In a wartime situation, what it means is like a regular traditional satellite costs between $100 and $400 million, and they fly at a certain altitude really high above the Earth. And you only need a few of them for all of a country's telecommunications needs. So what these low altitude Starlink satellites provide are hundreds of cheaper, lower flying. They fly at about 55 miles above the Earth's surface. They cost about $14 million a piece. And so countries can have hundreds of them. So it makes it a lot harder to attack, in a space war situation. And they're very, very useful for guiding drones, especially uh, US drones, which is why Marcelo Zero, who's the foreign relations advisor to Brazilian Workers' Party in the Senate, just published an article yesterday saying Starlink is a military machine that's at the center of the big geopolitical dispute in the world because it gives countries drone strike advantage. That's why Musk let Ukraine use it. That's why Musk was welcomed like a foreign leader when he flew to Israel after the start of the genocide and told Netanyahu he was going to turn control of Gaza's Starlink system over to the Israeli government. It's a very powerful and very sought after military technology. The Chinese are working on something similar, but they haven't launched it yet. So Chinese are playing catch up on it. Russia doesn't seem to have any. I'm not sure about what Russia's doing, but it definitely doesn't have the technology yet. And so the idea that Brazil would cut Starlink. So when Brazil froze the assets of Starlink, including several airplanes, things like that, when they froze Starlink's assets, it came out that the military was using Starlink here. So Musk had gone in when Bolsonaro was president and made a secret deal with the military. And then it came out that the commander of the army's son is Starlink's legal representative in Brazil. And so it's one of the reasons I think that Musk is so furious right now is that he's not as worried about Twitter as he is about Starlink, I think. I think he's making a lot more money off of Starlink than he is about Twitter. But the thing about Starlink coming in Brazil, it's just that he has this entire PR army just launching tons and tons of bullshit on the world on a daily basis. Like any day of the week, you can open up the papers and find, oh, Elon Musk says countries have to change their trans laws. Elon Musk says immigration is a huge problem. Elon Musk says this. Elon Musk says that. The whole time he's portraying himself as this kind of like messianic, quasi-religious figure who could save the world. He's secretly going around making military deals with all of the most authoritarian governments in the world, including the United States, #1 most authoritarian government in the world.
That makes sense. And so because of their failure to comply with Brazilian law, Starlink got frozen recently. Is that right?
So Starlink got frozen because of X's failure to comply with
Brazilian X's failure. Okay.
Because in Brazil, it's legal. And also he shut down X, owing 9 million reais in fines and with legal cases against him too. So since he's not in compliance with fines, it's completely legal in Brazil to freeze assets of a different company that has the same owner if one of the companies isn't complying. So that was a legal justification for freezing Starlink's assets.
That makes perfect sense now. And so now, but because Starlink is much more lucrative to Elon Musk, he is more reactionary and upset over that issue more than the Twitter ban.
I think so. Also, like this whole thing about freedom of speech on Twitter, you know as well as I do that after Musk took over Twitter, the amount of accounts of people he was deplatforming rose by 80%. And if you look at the governments that requested the most deplatforming that Musk complied with, #1 was Modi's India. But more interesting was #2 was Germany. And Germany is complete NATO. So this idea that Elon Musk is this multipolar, this hero of the new multipolar world, well, is doing all these military contracts with the Biden administration, military contracts with NASA, crying to the US embassy to see if he can get his assets back in Brazil, and helping Ukraine launch drones and all of this crap. Well, he's complying. I've never seen him lift a pinky finger complaining about Germany's request to deplatform Nazis, right? Like you don't see that in the news.
Lots of pro-Palestinian accounts too.
Yeah, and the number of accounts that he's deplatformed in Germany is like 3 to 4 times higher than Brazil.
Yeah, so it's not a free speech issue. And I guess I'm trying to understand all the parts to it, but okay. So what is so the State Department for the State Department? They want to continue to like. Are they lobbying on behalf of Musk and Starlink in Brazil?
Not exactly. What they did, well, if they are, it's behind the scenes. This has
Okay.
all happened very recently, right? This is all behind. First of all, lobbying is a crime in Brazil. So
Ah,
nobody can lobby for it. If it's what happens is when lobbying type activity happens, it has to be secret because it's technically speaking, it's illegal. That's one of the reasons why Brazil is more democratic than the United States. Also, corporate campaign financing is illegal in Brazil. But but all we know about the US, about Elon Musk's beloved US State Department under Biden, is that they posted a warning to Brazil's Supreme Court against banning X on the day that X got banned. And CNN Brazil reported that Musk was having conversations with the US Embassy in Brasilia to have them help him develop a legal strategy to recuperate his assets from the Brazilian government. And it looks like, to me, reading between the lines, they gave him the advice to just, first of all, as a starter, say, just tell them, just tell them that you're going to comply with the X ban on Starlink's internet providing system, right? And he did that.
that's the problem. So the Starlink's internet system was not complying with the X band.
No, he was bragging that Starlink was going to keep letting people access X. That was another issue. But this was after its assets were frozen. Then he was like, "Well, we're going to keep it running anyway for our clients," and he's like, "Well, they're going to keep having access to X." Um, so because they froze the assets and they demonetized it, because yeah, Starlink isn't just the satellite system; it's an obviously internet service provider as well. It doesn't just provide internet service for drone strikes. But so then he backed down after all of his bluster, like an angry 3-year-old who's had his toy taken away from him. A couple days later, he said, "Oh no, I'm going to comply with the Brazilian government ban on X with my Starlink system."
Mm-hmm.
So he's already agreed, despite all of his bluster, building up this narrative of this less than 10% of Brazil's Supreme Court is secretly running the country, building on Glenn Greenwald's silly narrative about that. From that, he's already like agreeing with them, he's complying. And my guess is that within a couple of weeks, he's going to comply with the Brazilian law again, like he did the first year he'd taken over X, and X will be reopened. Because if he doesn't, they've already lost 10% of their users to Blue Sky in less than a week. Blue Sky's just picked up 2.3 million new users, the number of users in Brazil total of X was 22 million.
Oh, wow. This makes sense. So can you explain what Glenn Greenwald's narrative or what his narrative is towards the Brazilian Supreme Court? Like, what is he saying right now?
It's the same thing. You got Jimmy Dore's version on your phone.
Oh yeah, let's
That's exactly
cover that.
what Greenwald's saying.
Hold
Just
on,
put that up and I'll address them both.
Okay, let me read that first. And Janet, I'll send you this tweet. It's very embarrassing. That Jimmy Dore said, and Jen can put it up, but I'll just read it for everyone. When Joe Biden congratulated Lula on being elected president of Brazil instead of screaming about fraudulent election, I knew there was some serious effery taking place. Lula was supposed to be far left, so why would a puppet of the CIA and MIC like Biden be happy about a far leftist being elected? If Lula was actually going to govern as a far leftist, there needed to be a comma. Yeah. Corporate-controlled Biden would have reacted the way the imperialists reacted when actual leftist Maduro was elected in Venezuela. He would have said the election looks fraudulent and the US is worried about the will of the Brazilian people being suppressed. But the Biden administration didn't do that. They were happy about Lula being elected, which means the election was rigged and the CIA, the election was rigged and the CIA had a hand in rigging it. And Lula had made a deal to be a good boy and go along with the CIA. You have to really try hard not to see it. It appears part of the deal Lula agreed was censoring Twitter in Brazil so they could get Elon back in line and under globalist control, so they could gain control of the global narrative again without some pesky billionaire providing a free speech platform to challenge the globalist narrative about pandemics, war, election rigging, immigration, and everything else. First of all, when the election was going on, or when Lula was inaugurated, Twitter was still not owned by Elon Musk. That's the first thing. But can you address
okay,
that?
So, okay, also, let's start. One, Lula has never claimed to be a far leftist. He's never claimed to be a communist or even a socialist. His big brother, Frei, forgot his name. His big brother is an actual communist, labor union activist who was brutally tortured during the military dictatorship. And he's always had this riff with his big brother. It's like, you guys, like even during the dictatorship, they tried to recruit Lula to the Communist Party by having him wait on a park bench, and a guy sat next to him pretending to read the newspaper. And he came back and just yelled at his brother, like, I don't want to be sneaking around like this. Everything I do is in the open. Don't invite these people to talk to me anymore. I don't want to be a communist. He's a labor union activist, right? There's lots of socialists in the Workers' Party. The Workers' Party is a party that has a full spectrum, left of center, different internal caucuses and tendencies and things like that. But Lula has never said, I'm a far leftist. He's not some Brooklyn douchebag going around drinking kombucha and trying to out-left everybody. So that opening statement is disinformation, for starters, Two, this great web that Dore has just weaved, based entirely on information from his buddy Greenwald, because Greenwald's been spreading this around for a year and a half now, completely ignores the fact that Brazil is only the second country this month, in the last month, to ban Twitter in Latin America. The first was Venezuela. So why did Venezuela ban Twitter? Is it because Nicolas Maduro is a puppet of the globalist Biden administration, that he wants to suppress free speech about vaccines and big pharma? Is that it?
No, because the opposition put up videos of extreme violence, and they were inciting burning of journalists. I remember one tweet where they said, it was a code in Spanish. They said, let's give him a warm shower or something like that, which is basically setting them on fire.
No, they sent out thousands of death threats against PSUV politicians, and they burned down all 10 state headquarters of the Socialist Party, and they attacked all 10 state headquarters of the National Electoral Council with Molotov cocktails. I was there that day. I spent a month reporting on the elections for Telesur, and they were inciting people to go out and do that. But guess what? That's the exact same thing that Bolsonaro supporters were doing during the lead up to the January 8th coup attempt. There were 2 Bolsonaro supporters arrested trying to plant a bomb in the Brasilia airport. They attacked the federal police headquarters with Molotov cocktails. There were the same kinds of death threats going out on Twitter and on other social media platforms. People were being doxxed. They destroyed 17 high-tension electrical towers around the country on the day of the coup attempt. It was all the exact same stuff because these people, Bolsonaro's aligned with Maria Corina Machado. Then they share tactics with each other. Maria Corina Machado is aligned with Netanyahu. Her party, Vinti Venezuela, they've signed terms of they signed a partnership in 2020 with Likud, and she supported Trump, she supports Bolsonaro, she supports Milei. Their people all meet each other at CPAC meetings and Foro Madrid meetings. So it was the exact same thing. It's almost identical reasons that Venezuela banned Twitter or X that Brazil did. So, but Dore is seeming to suggest that in Brazil's case, it was because he's a puppet of globalists. He doesn't talk. I don't think he knows that Maduro bans Twitter. To be frank,
Oh, he probably doesn't.
He didn't know what language they spoke in Brazil when he did an entire program infomercial for the U.S. Department of Justice backed Lava Jato investigation.
Really?
On the behalf of Glenn Greenwald. Greenwald gave an award in 2017 to the Lava Jato Task Force,
Yikes.
praising their incredible courage at an Allard Award. You know, Peter Allard, the Canadian billionaire, flew Greenwald up there, and Greenwald invited Jimmy Dore to come up and cover the event. And so Dore did a program in which he ran an infomercial for Lava Jato.
Yikes.
And one of his sidekicks is like, I want to buy a Lava Jato t-shirt. And on that broadcast, it's like, so what language do they speak down there? Spanish? Is that it? You know? And Michael Brooks did a good show pointing out the hypocrisy in that. But so that was just the first thing about Lula not being far left and Maduro also outlying X. But there's other problems with that narrative in that, the Biden administration recognized Lula's electoral victory and didn't cry fraud like in Venezuela. Well, first of all, Brazil delivered its disaggregated ballot information within 24 hours of the election and publicized it, made it available to the public. There's no chance that election could have been stolen because the electronic voting system is hacker-proof. All right, Venezuela, obviously the world's largest oil reserve holder, has been in the is a farther left government than Brazil. Definitely. I mean, Brazil's government is like center. The Workers' Party is a left-wing party, but it's a coalition government. They only have 13% of the seats in Congress. They wouldn't be able to get anything done if they hadn't entered in coalition with right-wing parties. It's a complicated political system. So obviously Venezuela is farther left. The government's farther left than the Lula administration, although the Lula administration has some policies, that are they have a more left-wing, for example, minimum wage policy than Venezuela does. Venezuela has better local governance system, more democratic, and it has better social housing program and things like that. But it's not like night and day. There's some things that are. The minimum wage policy in Venezuela is completely neoliberal. So, and they dollarize the economy there too. So, I mean, obviously, because they've got a gun up to their heads. But I'm digressing here on this. But the point is, what we know is that after Bolsonaro spent a year preemptively saying, just as Trump did, that the election was going to be stolen, right? A group of his military people got in touch with the U.S. government and the Russian government, and they asked the Biden administration and the Putin administration if they would back them up if they held an auto coup, if they cried fraud after the election and tried to hold an auto coup before Bolsonaro left power, would they receive support? And Putin said no, and the U.S. government also said no. So on Lula's inauguration day, both the Russian government and the U.S. government sent security personnel to guarantee Lula's safety. It's the only time the Russians and the Americans worked in partnership on something, I think maybe in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Or more. This is kind of interesting, right? And the point about Brazil is that the last 80 years of its foreign policy, it's always worked hard with ebbs and flows, but to maintain a kind of independent foreign policy that was independent. You could say they're not officially a member of the non-aligned movement, but their foreign policy attempts to be non-aligned, which is why, what I think is kind of bumbling fashion, they're pissing off the Maduro administration, the Biden administration, and Maria Corina Machado right now. with these comments about holding new elections. Nobody wants them. Nobody asks for their advice. This thing with Petro and in Colombia, like there's all this disinformation spread around on Twitter that the U.S. wants new elections there because they ambushed Biden. Some journalists ambushed Biden and said, Lula just announced that Venezuela should have new elections. You support that? And Biden's like, huh? What? Yeah. He might have thought someone was offering him a corn dog or something. And
Did Lula actually say that?
minutes. Huh?
Did Lula actually say that?
Yeah, Lula's suggesting that they have new elections, but 30 minutes after Biden said that, the State Department gave an official declaration that they don't support new elections, that what they support is Edmundo Gonzalez being declared president. And
like
there's
Juan Guaido.
Huh? Like
in
Juan
the
Guaido,
Juan Guaido fashion.
Well, the Lula administration has said that we don't want another Juan Guaido situation. The Brazilian government is saying that. The reason that the justification that Brazil's giving, which I think is wrong, personally, and Petro too, for continuing to give their opinion on things and stuff like that, is that they were witnesses to the Barbados Agreement. And so because of their participation in the Barbados Agreement, they have a right to be giving public advice to Venezuela right now. But the Venezuelans are getting pretty pissed off. And the biggest group that doesn't want new elections is Maria Corina Machado's group. Okay, yeah. So Corina Machado doesn't want new elections, obviously. And Maduro doesn't want new elections. But the reason that there's been this impasse and why Lula and Petro's public comments are getting more and more annoying is that the Venezuelan Electoral Council hasn't published the disaggregated voter data yet. And their line is that they were attacked by hackers. And it looks like, if hackers, I believe them. No, I know they were attacked by hackers. Definitely, because their site went down, Telesur's site went down on election night. They were attacked by hackers. I don't know if that's the entire reason it's taking so long for them to publish the disaggregated voter data. Well, the fact that they haven't given the disaggregated ballot data yet has put all the countries that said they would respect the results once the ballot data was published in an awkward situation. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're under direct orders from Biden, but it's definitely not helping Venezuela right now. And I wish that they would just shut up. That's my opinion on that. But I don't remember what the rest of the point was here.
Oh, the point was we were discussing the Jimmy Dore at Glenn Greenwald talking point. So now we're at Biden administration. Okay, we're happy. We just addressed that, which means the election that was rigged and the CIA had a hand in rigging it, and Lula had made a deal to be a good boy and go along with the CIA. That's just ridiculous. And Lula
so
was
what's this? Yeah, it's just absurd. What kind of 3D chess move of Biden's is it that Brazil's going to enter the Silk Road Initiative now? Is that Biden pulling the master puppet of puppets, pulling the strings that Brazil's business dealings with China grew by 33% last year? That's all because Lula is Biden's puppet. So that's what's really happening. Brazil refuses to take sides on the Ukraine-Russia conflict because of Biden's 5D chess move. Honestly, right?
Yeah.
And ignoring the United States government's warning about banning X. That wasn't Lula, that was the Supreme Court, but it's all because of this globalist master working the puppet strings behind the scenes, so that Brazil can sneakily act like it's not a pawn of the United States while it's secretly taking all of their orders.
Yeah, I mean, it is a ridiculous talking point. And so I guess...
one more thing. When Brazil let Iranian warships dock in Rio de Janeiro on their way to Venezuela last year, was that also one of Biden's orders?
No.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
No, you're right. Yeah, Lula has been conducting a very independent foreign policy, and they don't follow the U.S. or no, nor do they follow anyone else, and they have their own independent foreign policy, which is right. And it's very interesting how this narrative is being spread across Twitter about whatever this is. So
Yeah.
I just kind of wanted you to address that. So then, like, so it seems such a simple thing. Twitter just has to comply with Brazilian law, pay some fines, and everything's going to be fine.
Yeah, that's all they have to do, like they do in Germany or France or wherever, like they do in India and Turkey, US, all the other countries around the world. Or Musk himself has said, "Oh yeah, I don't plan on disobeying any local laws." With Twitter, we have to deplatform people if they're not obeying local laws. It's just Brazil he's worried about right now, and it's a country where Tesla has completely lost the battle for electric cars to BYD. Lula struck a deal with BYD to take over all of the Ford factories. Ford shut down after 100 years building cars in Brazil during the Bolsonaro administration due to their bungling. And BYD's taken all of the factories over. Brazil has lithium deals with China as well. And, so he's really worried about democracy in Brazil right now, about freedom of speech, but you don't see him complaining about Germany for some reason, even though they're deplatforming 3 times more people, 2 to 3 times more people in Germany.
No, it makes sense. So it seems like he has ulterior motive and alternate interests that is directly in conflict with the Brazilian government right now.
Remember that the Amazon region is one of the most mineral-rich regions on planet Earth as well. And so the deal that Bolsonaro gave him was to use Starlink to penetrate the most remote places of the Amazon. And there's cases of indigenous reservations deep in the Amazon jungle where they finally got their first internet connection via Starlink. Mm-hmm. And now they're just masturbating all day, watching porn.
Gosh.
So it's not necessarily positive.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, whatever. I'm just saying it's not necessarily positive that remote Indian nations are getting Elon Musk's internet connection. They're all going to be also not just porn. They're going to be bombarded with Nazi ideology too. I'm sure.
And this makes sense. So, what other projects are you working on right now?
Well, Aisha, basically just the fact that I've translated Lula's biography by Fernando Moraes, which is going to be released on Verso it was supposed to be September 3rd. Now it's been pushed back to September 17th. This is something I did 2 years ago. It takes a while for these books to be launched, but the point about the book is you don't even have to like Lula to like this book, because Fernando Moraes is Brazil's best biographer. His book on the Cuban, the Cuban Five in Miami, mm-hmm. The espionage case mm-hmm. of Cuban spies in Miami, that book was made into a movie. He's the guy who wrote the most widely sold biography of Paulo Coelho. He's Brazil's best biographer, and he's known Lula for 45 years, 50 years maybe. They weren't in the same political party. He was in a rival party back in those days, but he spent over 10 years gathering data for this book, and he was around at the time of most of the events, and it focuses on the first 80 pages is like a micro detailing of the 3 days before Lula went to jail, when all of the people surrounded the steelworkers headquarters building. And then it flashes back to the dictatorship, and it talks about, it gives the whole history basically of organized labor during the dictatorship, the repression, the rise of the steelworkers union in San Bernardo. And it basically ends in 1988 mm-hmm. or something. So It just serves as a really good introduction to the dictatorship period, even for people who don't like Lula, you know. And if you do like Lula, you'd probably, or if you want to learn more about who he is, where he comes from, and stuff like that, it's a really good read. It's written with a kind of cinema cinematographic quality, new journalism. Reads like you're watching a movie or something.
Oh, wow. Well, I can't wait. You should come back after the book is released so we can talk about it.
Sure, excellent, will do. And it's always fun coming on here.
Yeah, it's always
And
great.
I just like to plug one more thing.
Go
Look
ahead.
at Michael Brooks's YouTube video. Just do the keyword search, Jimmy Dore's really bad Brazil call. And
Okay,
it
we'll
will
put
give
a
you an
link on
analysis. Huh?
we'll put the link on this in the description box for that.
That shows his plug-in Lava Jato operation.
Oh wow.
So
I either didn't know or I forgot. That sounds horrible.
it is. It's horrible. It's fun hate watching.
Okay. We'll definitely put a link there. Thank you so much for joining us. And you have two more interviews today?
I have one more interview with a Turkish agency, and then I'm doing one of my weekly web TV shows in Portuguese at 2 p.m. on Brazil
Okay.
247.
Well, we'll give us a link and we'll put that in for if we have any
For
Portuguese speakers.
Portuguese speakers?
We have
Okay.
some Argentinians, we have some regular Brazilians too.
All right. Sounds good. Take it easy. It's always great to talk to you, Aisha.
Same here, and have a good rest of the day.
We'll see you later.